Okay, committee, we are back. We are live. This is Senate Finance, and we are going to do a short kind of presentation today. Senator Hardy has put together kind of a flow chart for what she thinks the decision points are and what our points, our decisions are. I'm still working to get a handle around something as massive as this weighting structure. I've asked Brad James to put together a demonstration for us of towns, no names, but towns that could be winners and losers in this because of the way that the weights interact, if we go with weights, or the way things are calculated. So we can see, I think there's and then we also have to take a look at bottom line impact on the ed fund. And we don't know because it's human behavior, but we can make some assumptions. We've been doing this for a while. So Senator Hardy and Faith, can you put up the flow chart? It's on our website, but it might be helpful. Or Senator Hardy, can you share it with us?
I can try. I've never actually shared my screen in Zoom because I'm usually the one.
Maybe Faith can do that then. If she's got a copy, it will just take us a minute or two.
I'm happy to do that. Just give me a minute.
Yep. Okay, Faith will get that up for us.
Oh, can you see it?
There it is. Okay, so Senator Hardy, do you want to walk us through what you think this is? Sure. I saw it yesterday, so.
Sorry, I was actually attempting to share my screen as Faith was doing it. I almost figured it out too.
Okay.
Faith, could you maybe zoom in a little bit?
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
And this is also on our website under my name. A couple people had asked for a flow chart, and I love flow charts, and I know the chair loves flow charts, but it was a lot harder technologically to make a flow chart than I had thought. I almost had my son do it for me because he could probably have done it in 10 minutes, but like moving the arrows around. But anyway, this is what I came up with. So it's a sort of flow-ish chart, but hopefully it will explain the decision points that this committee needs to make with this portion of the ed financing pupil weighting stuff that we need to do. So if you look to the left-hand side of the flow chart, the first decision point is in the bright red, and that is the decision about whether we adopt an expanded set of pupil weights or if we adopt a new set of cost equity payments. And I can go into what that means, but that is the first decision that we have to make, and that will then enable us to make the other decisions. So Brad James came in and explained to us the interaction effect between weights and how weights work versus how the cost equity payment or categorical aid grants might work in our funding formula. So that was a good basis. And then tomorrow, Professor Colby is coming in and focusing just on this question of pupil weights versus the cost equity payments. And we'll have other people come in, but that's the first decision we need to make. And then the second decision, and just to be clear, there could be some variation of, a combination of the two of those, but those are the basic two options that we need to decide from first. I see Senator Bray's hands up.
Oh. Okay, Senator Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Senator Hardy, I'm just wanting to make sure when I look at this, I get what's implied. Whether we choose adopt a set of expanded pupil weights or adopt a set of new cost equity payments, the second column, all those choices are still available to us and need to be decided. But it's not as though choosing one or the other in the first set precludes choosing any or all of the second column. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Let me explain that, because it's not exactly like that. And I'm sorry, this is why I was having a hard time trying to figure out how to put it all on a flow chart. So we make the decision about those first two options. And then the second column at the top, just look at the stuff above the blue, all the first kind of set of things.
Yeah.
The second column are the 4 categories in which we would be deciding whether to adopt pupil weights or cost equity payments.
Right.
And those are for students in poverty, the grade range of students, whether high school and middle school, enrollment, or size of school, that's small. Those are the small schools under 100 kids or 100 to 250 kids. And then the population density. Faith, it might be, so just one second, actually, those are the 4 categories for which we would either have weights or cost equity payments. And we could adopt some kind of combination of weights for some of them or cost equity payments for another, but the cleanest is one or the other, just in thinking about it right now. And so we do that second, and then the third group of decisions we would make is the transition mechanisms. How do we roll in whatever changes we decide to make over a 5-year period or whatever year period, and how do we sort of implement it? And then the evaluation is in pink. So the things that are in red are the priority decisions that we have to make. The pink decisions come off of those priority decisions. So how do we measure poverty using the SNAP benefit or the free and reduced lunch or universal income form? How do we transition into a new mechanism? And then how do we evaluate it once we're done with it? So those are the primary decisions we have to make. There's not really decisions to be made for the yellow items. Those are pretty straightforward. And then below that are the education committee things that they're working on and that they will eventually come to us. But first they need to make a recommendation on English language learners, small schools and merger support grants, and then potentially tuition setting in early college, but those were not as big of a deal. So that's why this enrollment one is in light blue up there, because it's sort of related to the work that the education committee is doing. So that's a secondary decision based on the education committee. And then the final thing is the education homestead tax proposal, or S212, that we looked at last Friday. And that has in it a provision about a education tax advisory committee. And that's why that one is green up there. So those are taxation issues that we would need to deal with or could deal with. But the primary decision is weights versus cost equity payments. And Faith, if you could scroll to the next page, this might help explain it a little bit better. So this table is an expanded version of a table that you have seen before in the presentation that Representative Kornheiser and I did for this committee and the education committee. These are the categories for which there are proposed weights in the original pupil weighting factors report that was prepared by Professor Colby and her team. And so it will give you an idea of what those 4 categories I was talking about, what the current weight is for poverty. For example, if you look at poverty, the current weight is 0.25. The proposed weight is 1.03, and the cost equity payment is $10,480. So those are the amounts we're looking at for each of them. English language learners is on this chart, but again, the recommendation of the task force was to do a categorical aid, and that is being considered. Whether or not they do that or do something different, propose something different, is being considered by the education committee. The weights that are here, that are listed here, are based on, if you look down in the notes, they're based on a recalculation of the weights done by Professor Colby and her team using school level data, additive operations. So right now we have a mix of adding and multiplying weights. This would, the proposal would be to just add them, using a base of 0 instead of some based on 0 and some based on 1. Right now we have a mix. And then using the free and reduced lunch poverty measure. So that's what the weights are based on. The cost equity payments are based on all of those same things, but they were calculated at a later date once we asked Professor Colby to do that. And they came out in her January 11th memo. So that's sort of looking at the weights. So we need to decide essentially between column, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, or column 5, or some kind of combination. The pupil weighting task force went into a lot of detail about what weights to propose, whether there were school level weights or school district level weights, whether they were additive or multiplicative, what they included, whether or not we used all 3 levels of population density or not, whether or not we used both the small schools categories or not. And my recommendation to keep it simple is we went into huge amounts of depth on those conversations, as Senator Brock will attest to too. And I think to keep it simpler, to start with these weights and these cost equity payments and decide whether or not we want to adopt one or the other would be the path of least resistance. And then if you scroll down again, Faith, I was asked to put together a pros and cons chart for weights and cost equity payments. And this was in the presentation that Representative Kornheiser and I did for this committee and the education committee. And there certainly are nuances to all of these things. And one can argue both sides of it, for sure. But we did our best to try to come up with pros and cons of the weights versus the cost equity payment. And just so you can sort of have a refresher on it for tomorrow when we hear from Professor Colby, the weights are what we have now. And what is being proposed is an expanded set of weights. So one of the benefits of the weights is that they're the current system, the current familiar framework that those of us who understand the system understand weights, and the education community, namely our school superintendents and our business managers, et cetera, and obviously AOE, everybody who's doing the system understands the weights right now and how they work more or less, not fully, but more or less. They're dynamic to differentials in budgets. They basically maintain local control and they adjust for inflation more easily. So those are the pros. The cons is it doesn't guarantee that school districts are going to use that the tax capacity that they gain from additional weights for spending on pupils or for spending on the area of need. They could choose to use that extra tax capacity to reduce their taxes and not spend anything additional on students or areas of need. Again, it's local control. It's a double-sided coin or a two-edged sword, or however you want to say it. It's both a benefit and not a benefit in this case, because if what we're trying to do is direct resources to an area of need, using weights doesn't necessarily do that. The larger weights offset the impact of the smaller weights. That's the interactive effect that Brad was showing us when he was in here last time. That's just because a district qualifies for a weight, if there's another district that qualifies for a larger weight, or if some districts get the weights and some don't, they will offset each other. So even a district with only a few students in poverty versus more students in poverty would have that impact of that weight negated. Or if a larger weight would negate the impact of a smaller weight. And Brad was showing that to us in that sort of simple version he gave, but it becomes much more apparent when you see the printouts and kind of things you don't expect to happen. And the equalized pupil calculations, which are the weights, lead to equalized pupils, which are used to determine tax rates. Those are confusing to voters. People don't understand what equalized pupils are because they think, well, my district has 100 kids in this district. Why is it saying that we have 112 equalized pupils? That makes no sense. It's confusing to voters. And frankly, it's confusing to a lot of legislators and other people too, how equalized pupils work. They need regular recalibration. The weights were calibrated at a point in time. And really the recommendations that they be recalibrated every 3 to 5 years. So it's sort of not a one and done thing. It needs continual updating. And as with both of these options, it may increase education spending depending on the choices that districts make at the local level. The cost equity payments have some of the same pros and cons and some differences. The cost equity payments deliver direct funding to the school district in that they send a check to the school district and say, this is the money you get for the number of students in poverty you have, or the number of students you have in a small school. It's a direct payment to a school district, and therefore it's not subject to local budgeting decisions. So the district is more likely to spend it on the area of need. It does maintain the ability for districts to spend additional funding as desired, in that they could still spend it on something different unless we decide to attach strings to the or requirements to the cost equity payments. But the way that the task force envisioned them, they would be much more flexible payments, but they would be given to school districts with the understanding that they were supposed to be used on improving educational opportunities for students in need. It simplifies the formula by eliminating equalized pupils. Just like I said, they're confusing. In this case, if we made everything a cost equity payment, we would do away completely with equalized pupils, and we would just be using average daily membership, or ADM, which is more or less the actual head count of students in a school building on a certain day. There are a little bit of tweaking for state placed students, but it's a much simpler thing to understand than equalized pupils. So in that sense, and because the payments are direct, it improves accountability and transparency. These people know what the money is for and for why. The cons are it causes more extreme tax and education spending impacts on school districts. So Senator Cummings' list of winners and losers, they're bigger winners and bigger losers when you do the the cost equity payments. The unknown unknowns, it's new, so it would be a new system that everybody would still be getting used to, and we probably wouldn't know the full implications of it until a few years into it. That's true for the weights too, but because it's more of a new system, it's based on the current system, it's easier to predict. It's not sensitive to differential budget needs or marginal costs, meaning that the amounts are average costs. They're based on average costs. So every district will get the average cost. If they happen to need a little bit more or a little bit less, the payments don't take that into consideration. It also needs regular recalibration or inflation adjustments because it too, they are based on fixed amounts in a fixed time. And again, it may increase the overall cost of spending, just like the weights, and it may do it a little bit more depending on the decisions of local school districts. I linked to the slides from the presentation that Representative Kornheiser and I did, as well as the task force report. There's a longer analysis and discussion of these pros and cons in section 5 of the task force report, which is pages 9 through 18. If you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend reading it before tomorrow. And then the final page, if you want to scroll through, Faith, thank you. Someone asked me to just make a list of the page numbers in the report that covers the certain topics. So that's what this is. The first one is the pupil weights versus cost equity payments, that sections 5, pages 9 through 18. The link on here will take you to the report, and then there's a table of contents that is hyperlinked that will take you to sections. But there's the list of the things that we'll be covering in this committee if you want to just read those pages. So I don't know if that answered your question, Senator Bray, but I was trying to, the weight, the set of weights are those 4 categories: the students in poverty, grade range, enrollment, and population density. So those are decision points. I don't think we would be making the decision of, well, we don't want to have a weight for grade range, but those are the areas where
Right.
we would have the set of weights or the set of cost equity payments.
Okay. And I'm going to move us along because we're going to do this tomorrow. Any questions specific to understanding the flow chart? Senator McDonald.
I believe I understand the flow chart, and thank you for the very detailed explanation. The question that I'm likely to ask myself has to do with, does the money that's sent to the schools actually show up and serve the kids that it's designed to serve? My inclination would be to ask Senator Hardy, which of those 2 choices does the committee believe is most likely to end up in service of the children for whom the money is being allotted, whether it's one method or the other? Because that's part of the unwritten testimony that we've heard, I think, was that there was a suggestion that folks didn't testify before the committee to say, we're darn sure every penny that comes in here for these children will be used for these children. And sometimes people called in later privately to say, my district might be eager to take the money and simply lower property taxes with it and not use it. So that's, if I understood how that was best,
Okay.
what choices to make, I would understand how to go.
Okay. In interest of time, because we're going to go over this tomorrow, I believe the committee's recommendation was that we use a hybrid.
Well, so just to be
Or
clear,
that was yours, Senator Hardy.
the task force recommendation was, these are the 2 options, and there wasn't a majority going with one or the other. So we presented 2 options, and we felt like they were both viable options and had pros and cons. And correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Brock. So, but that's what the official recommendation of the task force and what the 8 of us voted on was, to say both of these are viable. They both have pros and cons. One of the concerns with the weights, to just sort of answer a little bit of what Senator McDonald was getting at, one of the concerns is that because we are a very, very strong local control state, where all the decisions about spending are made at the local level, if the weights just adjust tax capacity, and then the school district decides how to use that tax capacity. And in some cases, they may use it to increase their budget and spend more in the area of need. In some cases, they may use it as decide to do a tax reduction and decide to do that, or a combination of the 2. And the cost equity payments are more likely to result in spending directly, but not guaranteed. The best guarantee to ensure that funding is spent directly on an area of need is a categorical aid grant. And that is why we recommended that for ELL, because that was the area where we felt like that was the most essential, that the resources be targeted to a certain area of need that is easily identified. But yeah, I don't want to start there yet because that's in the education committee. But that hopefully answers Senator McDonald's question. And
Okay, I'm
Thank you.
going to have to move us along because we've got a tight schedule later. Lost my train of thought here. Senator Hardy, is there a bill?
there is not a bill. We would
Then-
have to do one as a committee bill.
Well,
And
we have to notify joint, yeah, the
I have
Ledge Council.
I have
Yeah.
notified Ledge Council just to have a placeholder for it to make sure. I don't know if it officially has to come from you, but I've talked to.
No, anybody can
Jim.
sponsor a bill. I just wanted to know if there is a bill and where it is.
There's not a bill. It would have to be a committee bill. So I notified Ledge Council that a committee bill would have to be drafted for this.
And that should probably start in education, I would think, since whatever they do is headed this way, but maybe not. Okay, as long as we've done that. And okay, Senator Bray.
Yeah, just because I've been dealing with committee bills and timing constraints. So there's no way to get committee bill introduced by the 31st, but it just would go to rules and be released, you know. So there's still a clear enough pathway, but it won't involve the 31st deadline, just in case you hear about it and go, wait, how do we possibly make the 31st?
Okay. No, I'm very concerned that we aren't going to make crossovers. So the 31st is off. And I told Senator Hardy the other day, I don't see how we can possibly do the whole rewriting the property tax, income tax, the whole tax setup and get that done along with waiting and a couple other things by crossover. We can continue that discussion and work it through, but and I guess right now we're still waiting for Deb Brighton and her printouts so we know what could be the consequences to some taxpayers, which might make us decide to move or not move. But if we can, we will, but there are just a lot of heavy lifts in this one. So I'm going to move us on because Catherine Benham is here. And Catherine, welcome. Again, in trying to just look at revenues and future revenues, every year, once I said alligator jaw, they seem to understand. There's a graph or a picture that goes out.
That's coming on Friday. This is
Oh,
today. Today we're doing the Big Picture Ed Fund, or that's coming Thursday or Friday later in the week. The
Let me see.
alligator. This is more
I-
education fund.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It says state revenues and expenses over long term. I have.
This is the educate.
Well, whatever you're ready to, we'll just switch the title till Friday.
or Thursday. I can't remember. Faithful. No.
Okay. So whatever.
Well, this follows on with Senator Hardy's discussion about the education fund. That was
Okay.
partly.
That actually makes more. Yeah. More sense.
And so I guess what I wanted to talk about today was just the big picture, reminding you all of the education fund and the self-balancing feature and what pieces move as you move as different things change. And so this is very big picture. And this document is posted and I will share it also. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, So this is, I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this page, but I think you all know this page is the education fund, where you have all the sources right here and the appropriations down here, and the balance of how it allocates the revenue and the surplus. And what I wanted to do was take you back to a very big picture of the education fund. And I have condensed the lines, various lines of the education fund into just a few. And again, this is hypothetical. It's sort of close to recent years, but this is not tied to a specific year. And in this basic example, we've got 600 million coming from the homestead property tax, 170 in the property tax credit, 750 in the non-homestead property tax. And then I lumped all of the other revenues in one line, which includes sales, purchase and use, meals, rooms, lottery. You have all of those other lines just into one lump sum for a total of sources of 1.8 billion, sorry, with a B. And then on the appropriations, there's the education payment and then the other. And the other is special ed, transportation, tech ed, pensions. It's just everything else. And again, that equals 1.8 billion. And I would remind you that, again, this is a hypothetical because never in a real year does the revenue exactly equal the spending. So it's, but this is the concept of how things balance out. And in the first example, if you have all of the towns increase their spending, which is the blue box, for whatever reason they increase, and nothing else has changed, what changes are the property taxes, both the homestead and the non-homestead property taxes will change. So again, as people choose to spend more or less, that's where you see things move if the other revenues are not moving. And let me just take a step back, that the context for this is you all are going to be looking at printouts, lots of printouts as you go through your discussions. And you need to keep in mind some of these big picture concepts about what happens and what moves and changes or doesn't change as decisions are made. The next example is other revenues, if they decrease. So for example, if the sales tax decrease or the purchase and use decreased or meals and rooms, if there's less money in the education fund, again, the spending hasn't changed. There's been no assumption about the spending. What happens in this case if revenues decrease is that because of the self-balancing nature, property taxes will go up. And that is what makes sure that the revenues equal the spending for school budgets in the big picture scheme of things. And then the final example is that there's more other aid, more categorical aid, but there's no change in spending. And so the other line here, the 330 million has gone to 400 million. And if the total budget hasn't changed, it's just you're providing more aid through categorical aid, for example, transportation or small schools or whatever it is, tech ed, and total spending hasn't changed. There's actually no real change in the revenue thing. It's just how the aid has gone to towns. And this is making a big assumption that it's all proportional town by town. But it's just to let you know, if the total spending isn't changing, total taxes are not changing either. And it's a hard thing to, when you get into the town by town printouts, to separate all these different pieces. So that's why I'm walking through this big picture. Does that make sense to everybody? Are there any questions?
Questions? And Senator McDonald, can you take over for about 5 minutes while we walk through this? And I've got to take a call. So committee, any questions? And Senator McDonald, I'm going to leave it to you. Are you there, Mark?
I am here.
Okay. So I will be back in a couple minutes, and Mark, you're in charge.
Questions for the witness? I don't have a full screen, so you have to speak up.
What I might do next is walk through just some district examples. And so it's the same example, but on a district level. So once again, you have this District A and District B, and here is how it plays out in their district. And they're slightly different. They have different makeup of property wealth and kids. And and spending. And so let me just say this, I'm assuming that all towns increase their spending, not just this one, but if all of them increase, including this individual one town, again, their taxes, both their homestead and non-homestead, will go up. And likewise for town District B, where they have an increase in their spending, assuming it affects the whole education when everybody's impacted, again, property taxes go up. In a situation where other revenues decrease, where there's a change in other revenues into the education fund, they've not changed their spending at all, but both of them have their property taxes go up to help fill the lost revenue on the education fund. And then finally, the more other aid, if they get more other aid, and again, I just want to emphasize that this is a big picture example. This is assuming all towns are impacted equally. If they get more aid, there's actually no change for them. It's just the aid is coming to them in a different form. Instead of coming through the education payment, it's coming through categorical aid or whatever aid it is you've given them. And for both of them. So there's nothing in gray shaded. So there have been no other changes in them except for how the aid is coming to them. Does that make sense to everybody? And I don't know, Senator Hardy, if you wanted to say anything about how cost equity plays into this or
Yeah, I mean, if a district were to get a cost equity payment, they could adjust their other spending if they wanted to, in order to account for that cost equity payment. It would not necessarily impact their bottom line. It would be, they would get it as a cost equity payment instead of part of their general education spending. So as Ms. Benham says, it all equals out in these sort of generic examples, but in most school districts as well.
Any questions about chart B? If not, Madam Chair, welcome back.
I just had one final thing to say, which is this is a big simplification, and towns are not impacted uniformly. So when you get to these town by town printouts, whether you use weighting or cost equity, you are also, some towns are going to have more tax capacity. So some are going to have less. And so there will be those changes as well. But overall, you may not have a change in total property taxes raised. You may have a difference in where it's being raised within the state. And that's one of those nuances you need to keep in mind as you go through those town by town printouts that you will have coming your way.
Okay. But if schools have been getting, we've told the big loser is losing $10 million in one of the printouts. I can't see that there's a way that a school can absorb, even over 5 years, a $10 million hit, unless, you know, they were getting it for poor children and now they don't have that many poor children. There's got to be some impact with a change this large. I mean, have we ever done a change this large?
I would say Act 60 was a big, enormous transition for the school districts. And I have...
but that didn't change the weighting, right?
It changed the tax capacity.
Yeah, it did that.
Remember, there were some towns that
were towns, Shark Tank. I do remember that.
So they were towns who, I think the lowest one was 5-cent tax rate. And then the highest one was 250. I can't remember. It was they were real extreme. So those towns on both extremes.
There was nothing in Standard and to tax. Yeah.
And so, you know, it's interesting because we've been trying to, for some reason in my mind, I think somebody looked at what happened to districts after Act 60, what happened with the spending, and I haven't been able to dig up a real report.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I know one of my schools cut out violin orchestra, but I don't think I think theirs was a 28-cent tax. And they never got it down that low again. So that would be interesting. How did schools react to the last time we did a change that caused major shifts in funding to some schools? And just have an idea so that next year when the budgets come out, we aren't in shock, that we have some idea about what we might see. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the point that it's impacting tax capacity is a really important one, because it's not impacting their budget directly. It's impacting their tax capacity. So how much they're able to raise in order to support their budget on a certain tax rate.
Right.
So that they would potentially have, if their tax capacity drops a lot, they might have to raise their rate to spend the same amount.
Yes.
And that's why it's really important that once we make a decision on the direction we're going, then we talk about transition mechanisms, because I believe with Act 60, the towns that saw the big drop in tax rates, it happened all at once, but the towns that saw the big increase, it was phased in. That's what I remember hearing in testimony. Is that right, Catherine?
I think that's right. There may have been a 2-year phase in for because there was, the transition also happens to be that you all get out in April and budgets are already set. So there's a limit to what you can do in that first year. So it may have been when we talk about it now, I'm thinking it may have been a 2-year phase in for the people who are coming down, but the people who are going up were clearly phased in. I'm much more clear about that piece of it, because there was a limit to how much their tax rate could increase. Senator
Right.
McDonald remembers that.
Yeah. And then the other big change that we made with Act 46 that also had a big change, had some big changes in some districts, that was also phased in over 5 years. So that is another sort of example of how we can do a phase in that wouldn't happen all at once. And it wouldn't certainly happen for next school year, because districts a lot of them have already passed their budgets for next year. So anything we did would start in the following school year at the earliest.
Okay, Senator McDonald.
Just also there, in Act 60, there was a major slug of new money, which helped both the phase in and mitigated many of the losers that would have, which has been quite stark without that slug of money.
And we do have a surplus. So if we're going to slug anything, this is probably a good year to do it, because we do have excess revenue. There's been several proposals for how to spend it, but this would definitely be one way to do it, and see if we can phase this in. Okay, any other questions for Catherine? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still waiting to see if I'm going to get any questions. I'm not. Faith. Oh, no. Yeah, we are looking for David Hall. Faith,
I'm emailing him right now.
okay. And maybe Senator Sirotkin. S210 came to us. Michael, you want to walk us through what this is, or just tell us what's going on here? I know this one is on a fast track.
Well, we hope so. S210 is a successor to S79, which appears on your calendar every day, because there's no way to get it off there other than to vote for a veto override at this point.
Oh, well, this says 210.
Right. This is a successor bill to S79. It's almost identical, but makes some changes to the governor's, in response to the governor's veto message. So it passed the Senate, S79 passed the Senate 20-10, but only got 95 votes in the House. So we're pushing this forward with the hopes of putting something more acceptable to the governor this time around. I personally tried to lobby the governor before he vetoed it. We did not see the veto coming, quite frankly, until the very end. This is an issue that deals with rental housing, safety and health. And it's been around, depending upon who you ask, for several decades, or at least 4 years since I've been chair. We've gone through the normal procedure where we waited a year, then we sent people out to form a formal study and come back with recommendations. Throughout this process, we were in close contact with the Department of Fire Safety and with the Department of Housing and Community Development. They were part of the groups looking at this, and we adopted their plan pretty much total as they made a recommendation. So 4 years later, we thought we were in good shape to finally crack this nut, which is essentially to have more professional health and safety inspections in the state of Vermont. We have one of the oldest housing stock in the country, and we have for decades relied upon volunteer town health officers, which the standing joke is that person who gets appointed to be the town health officer frequently is the last person standing at a select board meeting. So it doesn't work real well. 7 towns in the state of Vermont or cities have gone to their own professional inspection system. This would establish a statewide system. It went through this committee last year. There's one fee in the bill for $35 to take all rental units and short-term rentals and have them register with the Department of Health and Safety. And that money essentially pays for the 5 new positions in the Department of Fire Safety to do these inspections. That section hasn't changed at all. The only sections that have changed in this bill is to, at the governor's not direct request, but in his veto message, he was concerned about some of the smaller units and some of the short-term rentals. And we made some exemptions there that allow for triplexes that where an owner lives in the house, those don't have to register. And also units that are only rented for less than 90 days of a year. There was some confusion around camps. My committee, and I think the full legislature, never intended to cover camps, but we made that clear. And the governor had 2 other concerns that were technical in nature that we cleared up. One was this was never in this bill intended to be other than a complaint-driven program. And in practice, Department of Fire Safety generally does just complaint-driven inspections, and that was our intent, but we made it crystal clear with the language in this bill. And the other change was the governor felt that there was no prohibition on someone from fire safety going in and seeing a minor violation and shutting the unit down. That's not the way it works in the real world. There's discretion so that the punishment will fit the crime or the violation, but we changed the language in the bill from S79 to make that crystal clear. So that's the totality of the changes. And this bill we felt was going to go into effect this summer, and we're not making many changes, and we want to just keep it moving right along and put it back on the governor's desk. And David Hall can go into some of the details if you want to hear more, but as I said, from the Finance Committee's perspective, it made a quick stop here last year. Nothing has changed in that section. It's still a $35 fee to register, and that fee continues to pay for the inspectors.
Okay, committee, would you like to walk through the bill with David, or? Yeah, okay. Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. We want to walk through the bill?
Did Senator Sorokin, didn't you just hit the highlights there?
He did.
I focused on the fee, but I did also give the whole gestalt of the bill. Yes.
All right. Senator Brock.
Just mention that the vote in the committee was 4-1.
Guess
You may
who
have
the one?
no idea who the one was.
couldn't guess. I think it was the same vote last year, wasn't it?
It was.
So I thought. All right, technically, our field is the fee. And we did do this last year. I don't feel a need to walk through it at this point.
I
Senator
withdraw my
Bray?
thumbs up.
I said, I didn't hear you.
I said, I withdraw my thumbs up, on I'd like to reconsider my vote. So,
My thumb did its own thing. Yes. Okay, Senator Hardy.
Okay, now everybody's gonna hate me, but I don't want to go through the whole thing, but if David could just walk through the in the actual bill, the changes that Michael just said, what's the difference between this bill and the last bill? Do you have that
David,
ready,
can you
David?
do
Is that?
Hi, good afternoon, David Hall, Legislative Council. I don't necessarily have it, highlighted or flagged as such. I mean, I could point out the places, I guess, substantively where they're different.
Okay, I think that would be helpful as much as you can do.
And I'm actually recalling that I did present that to the other committee, and maybe such a document is on their page that does have highlights that could help you see that.
Perhaps, Madam Chair, we could come back to it at another time when the highlights could be identified and presented.
This is the most time I'm going to have, and this is, I believe, on a fast track, Senator Sorokin.
We would like
You've been asked to get this
it has-
one
it has to
out.
go- It has to go to appropriations as well, and I'm hoping they give it as quick service as you have, Madam Chair, and send it over to the House.
Well, I have
I can do it in 5 minutes or less.
Okay, let's do it in 5 minutes or less.
All right. Can I pull my screen up? Is that something you'd like to
Yes.
see? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Well, I think you're seeing the Sorokin amendment right now.
Okay.
And that should go second, not first. So, I've never used Zoom before. I apologize. Are you seeing this on your screen now?
Yeah.
S210 is introduced.
Introduced.
Great. All right, I'll be quick. So again, the fundamental difference in format here is that rather than simply amending the existing chapter that has the Division of Fire Safety's jurisdiction over the things that it already does and adding rental housing to that, the format, the construct here is just to keep rental housing in its own chapter and be very clear about what we mean. But substantively, the purpose and the effect in the end is essentially the same. This applies to long-term and short-term rental housing. You'll see here that there's the authority to adopt rules on standards for rental housing health and safety. That is consistent with the previous construct. The part that Senator Sorokin was referring to here is the specific words complaint-driven system, so that everybody is clear that that is exactly what we mean.
Okay.
All of this language here in 2 is the same as in S79. It's all based on language that's in statute that applies to local health officials. So this is the other piece he was referring to, that the commissioner may impose an administrative penalty that's reasonably related to the severity of the violation, not to exceed $1,000 per violation. So that's slightly lower in the statutory standard than what's in the default provisions already over in Title 20, which I believe were maxed out at 5,000. So the registration requirement, the same. It applies for March 1st of the year following when you use the rent, when you had the unit in service. Again, it's a $35 per unit fee. That's the same as in S79. all of the data that goes along with the registration is all the same. Some of the differences between S79 and this appear here in the exceptions to registration. So I'll point those out to you. 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. 4 is new. This just belts and suspenders, make sure we are not talking about licensed lodging establishments, which are already licensed and regulated by the Department of Health. The accessory to an owner-occupied residence is new. Senator Sorokin mentioned this. So this is up to 3 units located in or on the owner's primary residence, right? So it's all either on the same property or it's all part of the same building. As long as the owner lives in as a primary residence, one of those 3 units, it doesn't count. The non-winterized seasonal units is the same. Is new. It's the same as Senator Sorokin mentioned, and that's it. There's a couple of pieces in the committee amendment that I'll have to point out, but we're pretty much done here as far as differences go. All this is the same. There, as far as your jurisdiction is concerned, there's a special fund that holds these fees. The fees flow to the fund, and from the fund, they go to DPS and to DHCD to pay for the inspectors and for the registration system. And the penalty for failure to register is a delayed effective date. So the requirements will come online, but the penalties are going to be another year after that. And that is it. The positions and the money are the same. It's up to 5 at DPS. It's 1.5 at DHCD. And the conforming changes are the same. The implementation provisions are the same. The VHIP program and the revolving loan fund are exactly the same. So all of that you've seen before. If I may quickly pull up the other committee amendment that will show you the modifications to the exclusions, which obviously would be a little bit different than S79. So I've got that. I'll share it. It'll take me 1 minute. You will be done. Are you seeing this amendment here to the Honorable Senate?
Yep.
Great. So a couple of instances going on here. This is the piece Senator Sorokin mentioned about units rented for fewer than 90 days. And second, it's just a conforming change. And then the appropriations piece, obviously probably not something you care about, at least from your jurisdiction perspective, but this is a COVID relief funding going to the Vermont Rental Housing Investment Program. So that is it. Questions?
And this would pull in Airbnb rentals.
Well, it's
If they
complicated.
meet the time frame.
Yeah, so the default rule is short-term rentals as defined in Title 18 are included. But then there's this whole list of exemptions that may get them out of it. So if they're seasonal, non-winterized, for instance, if they're part of a primary residence on a 3-unit property, for instance, or if they're fewer than 90 days a year, then even though you would be a short-term rental under Title 18, you wouldn't be required to register if you met one of those exclusions.
Okay, so if you just rented out a room during foliage season, you're not picked up. But if you're doing this on a regular basis.
Yeah, it really does come down to the number of nights.
Okay. And there's a $35 fee, which is the same as last year registration fee, which then goes to pay for the cost of the fire inspections, which are complaint driven.
Correct.
They're not, fire inspectors not going to come out and walk through your house to check out your grandma apartment unless grandma complains.
Explicitly complaint driven pursuant to the statute.
Okay. Committee.
Ready for a
What's-
motion, Madam Chair?
I am. I'm
Could
looking
I
at
just
my-
just one quick clarification, Madam Chair?
Yes.
You just mentioned a grandmother apartment. I thought that we exempted owner occupied duplex or an AUD or whatever, accessory
We
dwelling
do.
unit.
Up to three, up to
Okay.
3 units.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's have a motion for discussion.
I would move that we approve the bill when amended as recommended by the Committee on Housing and General
Okay,
Affairs.
the bill as amended. All right, further discussion. I assume, Sir Clerk, you're ready to take this vote?
Ready, Madam Chair.
Okay. Further discussion. If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no.
No,
Okay, I've got that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, Senator Pearson, I can't see. So I've got that as.
Madam Chair,
There
I'm
you
here.
are.
I am supportive, and I'll go back off camera now. Thank you.
Okay. We could see him. So I've got that as 601.
No,
6-1-0.
610. Senator
Same
Hardy,
bug.
you've got me confused on this one. All right. And Senator Sorokin, would you like to report it? Okay, good. Thank you. That
you.
gets us to the end, because when we were doing agendas, we thought there was a chairs meeting. But committee, one thing I wanted to let you know, it's on the agenda. I had a meeting last Friday with Betsy Bishop from the Chamber, Sarah Teachow from Blue Cross, and Michael Fisher, the healthcare advocate. You remember last year we separated the individual and small group because of federal tax credits and made it possible. The thought at that time was that it was in Build Back Better, and we thought it was going to pass, and it hasn't yet. But the president has announced they're going to be taking up things in that bill piece by piece and do the possible. We have a drop dead date in that bill, and I'm not sure when it is. I have a feeling it's probably something like June 30th. And all 3 agencies, groups have asked that we extend that drop dead date to September to give the federal government long enough time to do the right thing. And they've checked in September, somewhere in there is the latest date they can go, when I think it's Diva could handle all the paperwork for the open enrollment period. So Jen Carby is drafting something, and they will be in, I believe it's Friday this week, to tell you their story. What I wanted to let you know is they've drafted it. We can do a committee bill, which kind of hangs out there on its own. Or I've dropped an email to Senator Kitchell seeing if this is something we could request to have put on the budget adjustment, which might be a faster way. If we decide to do this, the sooner we let everyone know what the ground rules are, the better, so they can plan for it. And then we can start writing letters to Congress asking them to do the right thing. So I just wanted to let you know that that's what's happening. And they will be in on Friday, and we'll be able to take a look at the language and make a decision at that point. But I've got to go through, but I don't think we have a health insurance bill hanging up there that we could stick this on, which would leave us with a committee bill. And hopefully we could get it through the whole process quickly, but we'll see where that goes. So with that, tomorrow.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just quickly, we do have a bill that I and others have sponsored around a couple of free preventative care visits or cost share
Yeah.
free. So that I believe is still with us and could be a vehicle. Of course, I'd love to talk about the policy as
I was
well,
going
but
to say, I don't know that that's necessarily a policy we want to let go.
I think that bill is in healthcare, isn't it? Isn't it in our morning committee?
I'm honestly not sure because I mean, it was something I introduced last year and we talked about it the prior year, but don't hold me to where exactly it is, but I think that's
Yeah.
floating around.
I know we're doing a lot of work on primary care, and that got to do with, I think the problem we ran into was we always do, is when we add something, we had to subtract something, and they were trying to get some primary care stuff and hearing aids on the benchmark for is it the bronze
Well,
program?
I'm happy to just at least find out where the bill sits.
Yeah,
Madam Chair,
we'll
and tell
find
you.
that
I'll send
out.
you an email about that.
Okay, yeah. So that would be a vehicle too, if we decide we want to give up on that bill for this year. Okay. The other thing that's come up is, where are we? Okay, S-247, prohibiting discrimination based on genetic information. We have this, health and welfare would like it. It is an insurance regulation, but it is more readily in their field. And we did one like this. I thought we had done the same bill. Maybe it didn't make it all the way through, but Damien's going to walk us through it, and then you can decide if we want to pass it out or we want to send it over to health and welfare. Senator Bray.
Is this sort of aligned with HIPAA requirements, for instance, to keep information confidential so it doesn't get used for underwriting?
It has to do with underwriting, and I know we had a bill a couple of years ago, and I thought we had done this, but
I think we passed it just before COVID.
Maybe
The
that was
Senate
it.
passed it, but it never went through the House.
It never went all the way.
Yeah.
So we'll find out, and we'll take a look at it on Wednesday, tomorrow. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that if you want to ship that one out, you can. But it might also be just as fast if we think it's a good idea to kick it out and get it moving. Okay. Anything else the committee should know? Committee. All right. Senator Sorokin, where are you today? Now, I've been through the desert. I've been through mountains.
I think I've been asked that question before, and I don't know. I can't identify this picture. It must have come out of my gallery, but I don't know where it is. It's definitely.
I feel like I've been on a travel log with you.
Lost weekend.
I get the daily agriculture report from Senator McDonald, and from you, I get to travel.
I like this one. I'm going to stick with this one, but you can see there's snow on the ground and there's people ice skating on the lake.
Oh,
I don't know where.
Okay. Now I can, as you move, I can see people, but I wasn't sure if that was flowers or snow behind you. Because when you move your head, I guess there's some sunlight back there, but mostly it's black and white.
Yeah, it looks like I think it's a Vanderkamp painting. I think if that's the artist, there are all these little people on skates.
Well, I have a similar one, but it's a Cummings original, and it's of Woodbury Pond.
Right.
With skaters. There's some artist licensure in there, since the pond is more of a swamp than a skating rink.
Now that you've asked, Madam Chair, I will do some research to figure out where I was when I took the picture.
Northeast Kingdom School of Painters.
Right.
Okay, thank you, everyone.